Okay, can everyone hear me? Great. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, early good morning to the brave souls who are up very early, late, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be able to speak with you today. So my name is Sarwa Choudhury, and I am speaking to you from Korea in Seoul, and I work at the United Nations Development Program. And I manage UNDP's environment program here in Korea, and I also co-lead UNDP's inclusive green economy programs in 20 countries around the world. So again, thank you so much to the organizers at DAEJAYON and everyone else for inviting me here. So I'm going to be speaking about green recovery in developing countries. But let me just start with speaking about COVID-19. So we are seeing that the COVID-19 impacts around the world are both immediate and drastic. So but at the same time, there is another deep emergency, that's the planet's unfolding environmental crisis. Biodiversity around the world is in steep decline. And also we see in the cyclones, wildfires around the world, and also the rainfalls, floods. Even here in Korea this summer, we experienced massive floods. Since I've been here 5 years, this was the massive flood that I experienced in Korea. And so all of these climate disruptions that we are experiencing around the world kind of gives us a feeling, right, that we are approaching a point of no return. So as the COVID-19 crisis continues to unfold and countries are initiating the recovery efforts, these unprecedented challenges brought on by the pandemic can be seen as an enormous opportunity that we shouldn't really miss, because this is an opportunity. I think one of the speakers earlier talked about that this gives us a pause, right? When things are a bit slow, to pause to see how we can change our business as usual approach, and how we can reset of the usual way of doing things. So you may have heard the words build back better. So we are talking about building back better, even building forward better. So we build back to not where we were, but to something better with the less impact on the environment and climate change. So basically today I will be speaking about this kind of green recovery efforts of United Nations Development Program, and also a bit about our work with the youth. But before I go further, I have 2 video clips for you, and if the organizers can please play them.
And I'm inviting you to be a part of the solution. 5 years ago, world leaders signed the Paris Agreement, and they promised to keep the global average temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue 1.5 degrees to safeguard future living conditions. Since then, a lot has happened. But the action needed is still nowhere in sight. The gap between what we need to do and what is actually being done is widening by the minute. We are still speeding in the wrong direction. The 5 years following the Paris Agreement have been the 5 hottest years ever recorded. And during that time, the world has also emitted more than 200 gigatons of CO2. Commitments are being made, distant hypothetical targets are being set, and big speeches are being given. Yet, when it comes to the immediate action we need, we are still in a state of complete denial, as we waste our time creating new loopholes with empty words and creative accounting. If you read through the current best available science, you realize that the climate and ecological crisis cannot be solved without system change. That's no longer an opinion. That's a fact. The climate crisis is only a part of a bigger sustainability crisis. For too long, we have been distancing ourselves from nature, mistreating the planet, our only home, living as if there was no tomorrow. At the current emission rates, our remaining CO2 budgets for 1.5 degrees will be completely gone within 7 years, long before we'll even have a chance to deliver on our 2030 or 2050 targets. But I'm telling you, there is hope, because the people have not yet been made aware. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis, nor can we treat something like a crisis unless we understand the emergency. So let's make this our main priority. Let's unite and spread awareness. Once we become aware, then we can act. Then change will come. This is the solution. We are the hope. We, the people.
Hi, this is Blackpink. Recently, we've been hearing more and more news about climate change.
We're not experts and we're not fully aware of all the issues, but we do care about our planet and we want to learn more.
We learned that our world is changing. Every year, we're seeing more extreme weather, things like heat waves, droughts, and flooding.
수많은 이유 중 하나는 바로 지구가 자연 서식지를 잃고 있고 많은 자연 환경들이 빠른 속도로 사라지고 있기 때문이라고 합니다.
I was born in 1997. At that time, 46% of the Earth was made up of natural habitats. But now, only 35% remains and more are disappearing every day.
These places and the animals and plants that live in them are important for our life on this planet. They help control our climate, provide food, water, and even the air that we breathe.
But it is not too late. We can still decide to make it better.
In November 2021, the UK will host the UN Climate Change Conference, also known as COP26, where world leaders come together to take the action to protect our environment.
This is a global challenge. Each and every one of us could make a difference, and we need to act now.
This is our planet. This is our future. Climate change affects us all.
We still have so much more to learn about what's happening, what needs to happen, and how we can play our part.
저희의 여정에 동참해주세요.
Okay, so what did you all think? So the gap between what needs to be done and what is actually being done is quite stark, as Greta Thunberg and also Blackpink, they were highlighting in the videos. So the need for climate action is urgent, and of course we should be positive and looking forward to actions in the future. That was also coming across. So this is actually really great that again I'm able to speak to all these university students. And as the previous speaker said, I've also graduated from university for a few years ago. So it's always great to be interacting with students. So the point I wanted to say is that the governments are planning right now with the COVID-19 and the recovery efforts. They are planning in a completely unprecedented manner towards recovery. So the need is to make sure this recovery process is green and with a long-term vision towards sustainability. So building back better, building forward better. And this represents a historic chance to leap forward and seize the economic, social, and political advantages of green growth economics. And so here you can see a quotation from the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and he's talking about green economy is the future. It fosters prosperity, creates decent work, addresses the root causes of conflict, and contributes to the full enjoyment of all human rights. Not only civil and political, but also economic rights, social rights, and cultural rights. So let's move to the next slide. So in this slide, I'm basically talking about green economy and as a vital and interconnected pillar of United Nations development programs beyond recovery approach to achieve the sustainable development goals. You heard about the SDGs already. So in 2015 is quite a seminal year we can say, because this is when the world leaders got together and agreed on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and also the Paris agreement for climate change. So these are the kind of the interconnected. All this work is quite interconnected in terms of how we are looking into the green and beyond recovery approach. And as you can see in the figure, we are looking into green economy with digital disruption, with social protections, and also governance issues. And they are all of these pillars are very integrally related to each other. So let's move to the next slide. Yes, so this slide, I think this one is quite self-explanatory. If you look at the numbers, right, we can see the numbers are only rising and the need for support is also only rising. We are thankfully now talking about vaccines, but again, we are looking at all the numbers, right, all the need for providing the vaccine in each country, to different groups who need first, and all of these issues are very much in our minds right now. In terms of the health pandemic, this figure is already, I think, dated, because 1 million deaths and counting, over 42 million cases and counting. Humanitarian crisis. It is health pandemic, but it's also a humanitarian crisis. 88 to 115 million people are expected to be pushed back into extreme poverty because of this pandemic. And the socioeconomic challenges, global GDP is expected to decrease by 4.4%, and Human Development Index is expected to decline for the first time since we started looking into HDI issues. So the need for integrated and long-term multilateral cooperation is very important at this time. Let's move on to the next slide. Yes, next slide, please. So green recovery trends to date. So here I'm going to be talking about the trends based on UNDP's own foresight analysis, also finding from our midterm review of UNDP strategic plan, and looking into different typology of countries. So initial response phase saw that the spending primarily to keep people employed and businesses afloat. So this is the trend across country typologies. Many fossil fuel intensive sectors, for example, airlines, they were badly hit, as we know, by the downturn and received a high proportion of bailouts. Many low-income countries are still in this phase. So that's a response phase. If you look into the recovery, governments are again looking into re-stimulating their economy. So the plans can be, mentioned more or less green, but still the stimulus packages don't usually consider climate change specifically. Countries seek to economic re-stimulation of the is more overriding priority. So we can say this is still a mixed bag, and some efforts into green recovery. But the long-term planning, this is where the strongest examples of green recovery plans can be made that are meaningfully and substantively integrated into multi-year, multi-dimensional economic growth plans. So their examples are still few, but they can be found in some different country typologies. So let us move to the next slide. So since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020s, governments in the G20 countries have committed at least $400 billion to support different energy types through new or amended policies. The share of support to fossil fuel-based energy, however, is still very high, and COVID-19 recovery packages can be made greener. So you can see some of the numbers, at least US $189 billion for unconditional fossil fuels, 27 billion for conditional fossil fuels. So you may ask, what is the difference, conditional, unconditional? So the fossil unconditional policies describe those that do not take into account climate change and pollution standards. As an example, for fossil unconditional funding is a US tax credit for natural gas manufacturers that was announced in the summer in July. Fossil conditional policies support production of and consumption of fossil fuels with climate change targets or additional pollution reduction requirements. But the support for fossil fuels in response to the COVID-19 overall shows that the G20 governments are moving in the wrong direction still and are likely to undo the little progress that were made between 2014 and 2019. So the message that we can take from here is green stimulus packages are still not the prevalent norm, and integrated long-term forms of multilateral cooperation can play a role in changing this. Let's move to the next slide. So now I'll talk a little bit about UNDP's approach and the kind of how the environmentally perverse subsidies that can be emphasized to provide a kind of a strong comparison with that. So there are three drivers that we are looking into in terms of UNDP's NCEs, which is the Nature, Climate and Energy Green Recovery Transition Pathway. So we are looking into growth and jobs creation, and also looking into aligning and accelerating public and private finance with SDGs and Paris Agreement in mind, and also integrated policies and regulations. And the three major system shifts that we are looking into, these are looking into from fossil fuel based to low carbon economics, from unsustainable to sustainable consumption and production patterns that promotes resource efficiency and correctly value natural capitals. And also from high to low inequality, combating economic, social, and educational, as well as digital inequalities that exist now around the world. So let's now move on to the next slide. So I'm part of UNDP's Nature and Climate and Energy team, and UNDP, we are committed to supporting countries to prepare, respond, and recover from the pandemic that in ways that advance the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. So we are supporting countries to build back better, greener, equitably by developing climate resilient, low carbon, fiscal, and policy responses that unlock concrete investment opportunities while driving job creation and increasing economic and environmental resiliency. So you can see them, I won't read through them. So basically the three key areas, low carbon energy transition, combating inequalities, as well as leveraging nature-based solution. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So we are looking into targeted technical expertise, analytics, and diagnostics to develop feasible pathways to green growth economics. In the interest of time, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so the Nature, Climate, and Energy team that UNDP, as I said, I work with this team. I'm based in Korea, but I'm also part of this headquartered team. And we are actually based in we have presence in 170 countries around the world, and we have climate change related programs in 145 countries. And in terms of our work in COVID-19 context, our 802 projects covering 137 countries, valued about $4.9 billion that are now we are working on, and they have leveraged an additional 21 billion in co-financing. And these are aimed to benefit 86 million people directly and 101 million people indirectly, including smallholder farmers across the world, so that they can benefit from resilient agriculture, and people who are experiencing increase in annual income with more effective climate adaptation measures. Let's move to the next slide. I'm going to transition a little bit to our work with the youth here. I wanted to give you a couple of examples. So Yango is a youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It consists of many youth-led organizations, groups, delegations, and individuals working in climate change related areas. And I just put a picture of a background paper that you can find online, and it's Adapt for Our Future, Youth and Climate Change Adaptation. And this gives some ideas and kind of the vulnerability and also the potential to contribute to climate change adaptation measures as agents of change. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so there are youth engagement in climate change adaptation and in terms of solutions to barriers and opportunities. There are many possible ways to overcome the barriers, for example, by providing enabling environment which can institutionalize youth participation in decision-making processes, and also dedicated climate change education in school curriculum, and special funds for financing youth actions for climate change. I think the ambassador of Bangladesh in the early session talked about, how we need to have this climate change education from our elementary early school stages, and because we are all living with climate change. So this is very important, and also institutionalizing the participation of youth in the decision-making processes. So next slide, please. So the youth, UNDP has this Youth Global Program for Sustainable Development and Peace that started from 4 years ago, and this is kind of we are on the 5th year now. It's a global programmatic offer on youth empowerment designed to sharpen the organization's response to challenges young people face around the world, and also kind of implementation of our youth strategy, and which is related to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and UN's Security Council Resolution 2250, which is on youth, peace, and security. And as the previous speaker said, there are a lot of activities happening that you can look up online. Another one I just quickly wanted to highlight, please, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so the young and environmental journalists, this is a joint force between UNDP, the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, and UN volunteers to provide learning and networking opportunities to young journalists and young environmental and human rights defenders, which will include some 70 participants from Global South. And this was launched this year in July. And so this is an opportunity for students in high school and college, to be participating in. Let's go to the next slide. UNDP's experience in supporting youth in meaningful participation for climate action. Again, there are a lot of examples that you can look up, I think, online. One of the examples I wanted to highlight is the youth program implemented by UNDP in the Arab states, where we have been working with youth in 18 different Arab countries since 2015. So this year, climate action is one of the key themes of this program. And practical level, this means the youth participants are receiving training on climate and environment and are encouraged to be climate aware and active on multiple levels, both through personal, in their personal lives and also through activism and social innovation. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. And we talked about the Paris Agreement, and that we have the climate conference, COP26. This year for COVID-19, it was postponed. It's going to be happening, taking place next year, COP26. And I wanted to highlight one of the events. We know that UK will co-host along with Italy. And then, so in November, and hopefully this will be maybe a mix of at least in-person and hybrid meetings. We will see how the COVID pandemic goes. But in partnership with Italy, Italy will be hosting a number of key preparatory events, such as a youth event and pre-COP summit, which will be held in Milan, Italy in September. the end of September to 2nd October 2021. And almost 400 people aged between 18 to 21 from 197 member countries of the UNFCCC, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, will meet in Milan to elaborate concrete proposals on topics that affect the negotiation processes of pre-COP26 in Milan, and also COP26 that will take place in Glasgow, UK, later in the year. It's a plan to be taking place in November. So the pre-COP is in September, then we have the actual COP in Glasgow in November. So these are some of the opportunities I wanted to highlight that for young people to be active on. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, so I wanted to show you some slides from the Seoul climate strike from last year. These are actually from my phone, so not very good quality pictures maybe, but yes, so we are, there's a very active community here in Korea as well in terms of climate activism, and we had a good rally as part of the Fridays for Future call and in Seoul. So I wanted to just show you some of the pictures from there. And let's go to the next slide. That will be my last slide. Okay, so yes, I wanted to thank everyone for this opportunity again to be here. And as you can see, my email address, if you have any questions, because I know we have very short time. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch with me about our climate change work in general, also UNDP, United Nations. So I'm very happy to speak with you. And again, I just want to mention that, I think this COVID-19 has kind of a awakening call for us to be active, to do things better. And I think all of these opportunities when we are doing online, this is a great way for us to know what's happening, what opportunities are there, how we can make a difference. And so I really hope a successful event, and thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks.